It should go without saying that Dangerous Dan Murrell is a legend in the movie trivia Schmoedown. While Sam Levine may have recently shaken up who truly holds the status as the greatest of all time, Dan Murrell was the original GOAT. His introduction to the singles league and subsequent run to a championship, followed by multiple title defenses, is unlike anything we've ever seen. Dan is the kind of competitor who is more interested in entering the ring and leaving with a win, rather than focusing on flashy entrances, trash talk, or other possible distractions. He lets his performances in the Schmoedown speak for themselves. So with plenty to go over, let's look back at Dan's history in the league. Casual fans of the Schmoedown might not be aware that Dan's road to stardom in the league didn't actually begin in singles competition. In the 2015 team tournament, Dan partnered up with Mark Riley, forming Team Champs. With Riley being the Schmoedown champion and Dan being the champion of Screen Junkies movie fights, this was an incredible team from the get-go. In hindsight, however, this might be one of the best pairings in Schmoedown history. Their first match was against Team B Team, made up of Copster, Ace, and Cody, and while on paper you might say that the B Team never stood a chance, they did put up a valiant effort, and as we'll see later on, anything can happen in the Schmoedown. Anything. Team Champs walked away with the victory, but then lost to top 10 in the next round. Besides one little exhibition match that we don't need to talk about, this was the last time we would ever see Dan in team competition. Months down the line, Dan began his rampage in the singles league against John Campea. After that disappointing early exit for Team Champs in the tournament, it was interesting to see how Dan would fare on his own. With his first match ever being a 13-6 TKO, it was easy to see that Dan was ready to make a name for himself in the Schmoedown. His next match was against fan favorite Scott Mantz, who had just come off of an iconic win against John Roca, with both of them being 1-0 and the league being so small in early 2016. This was set to be a number 1 contenders match. By putting up 16 points against Mantz's 11, Dan not only earned a title shot, but he was proving himself to be a top-tier competitor. He was already equaling and improving upon league averages at the time. He was answering questions correctly no matter what the category. He was showing off a variety of strengths within the Schmoedown and virtually no weaknesses. Dan moved on to face his former partner Mark Riley for the belt, and finally it looked like he had some real competition. Though Dan did have a pretty big lead at one point, Riley fought his way back. Things ended up going down to the wire with a Spielberg question right in his wheelhouse. Dan won the belt with a score of 18-15. Murrell was now 3-0 and looked absolutely unstoppable. After Classy Clark Wolf worked her way up to a title shot, Dan was ready for his first defense. With an extremely dominant performance matched by one of Clark's all-time weakest performances, this one wasn't even really close. Dan's record improved to 4-0 with an 11-4 TKO over Wolf. Months down the line, at the inaugural Schmoedown Spectacular, Dan Murrell faced co-creator of the Schmoedown Baby Cards Mark Ellis. This was a really great match and pretty underrated in terms of championship matches over the years. Murrell continued to show that he not only has a vast knowledge of film, but that his recall for answering questions is equally as impressive. And to be a great champion, you definitely need both. Things went down to the final question, and Dan walked away with a 23-20 victory, leaving him 5-0. One of the stranger, more forgotten moments in Schmoedown history is that Dan Murrell joined Finstock, the Patriots, and Mark and Draco right after this match to form the original Lion's Den. Obviously, he didn't really fit their whole supervillain kind of vibe from the start, so he left soon after, but it was worth mentioning anyway. Murrell's next match came in the form of John Roca, who had been fighting vigorously for that belt from the moment he entered the league. With two of the greatest singles players of all time clashing together, I have to admit that this is the most emotionally invested I've ever been in the Schmoedown. When Dan looked shaky on his 5-pointer and subsequently lost the belt to John Roca, I was crushed. It felt exactly like a favorite sports team losing in the championship game, and at that moment I truly knew how much the Schmoedown meant to me. After being handed his first loss, Murrell tried fighting his way through the 2017 free-for-all. He entered in the 12th spot and proved why he was considered the greatest of all time. He scored 47 total points, which is almost double the amount that anyone else accumulated. He lasted 10 rounds and was only bested by the perfect score of Mark Draco, who famously took out some of the Schmoedown's best players all at once. 2017's Collider Collision proved to be Dan's most impressive showing of all time, with all of the people who had held the Schmoedown singles belt, Murrell, Riley, and Roca, battling it out in a triple threat for the championship. This was to prove who was truly the most worthy. Riley lost to Dan, but beat Roca. Roca lost to Riley, but beat Dan. Dan lost to Roca, but beat Riley. This triple threat was the perfect way to settle this little championship love triangle, and Dan ended up coming out on top on the final question. But what followed immediately after was a challenge from the free-for-all winner Sam Levine. While Sam hadn't perfected his Schmoedown game quite yet, he was still a really good player. Dan accepted the challenge, and miraculously, after that huge triple threat match, went on to drop 26 points in a close victory over Levine. It's interesting that we talk about Dan's most impressive showing of all time, because what followed were a couple of bumps in the road. Several months later, Dan faced #1 contender Christian Harloff in an attempt for his 4th successful title defense. With two players who were averaging huge point totals, this was just kind of a strange match. Whether it be that they were just off that day, the difficulty of the questions, whatever it may be, the beginning of round 5 of the championship match saw a score of 7-6, with things finishing in Harloff's favor 14-13. Murrell announced that he was retiring from the league, at least for the time, and we wouldn't end up seeing him for a pretty long time. At the second live event, after Team Action lost to the Shire Wolves, we saw the reveal of the 5 Horsemen, former team champions Roka and Nost, current Inner Geekdom champion Jason Inman, and former singles champions, both coming out of retirement, Riley and Murrell. Dan challenged Andrew Guy to a match because Guy had been talking trash about Murrell for months, and then we eventually saw the greatest upset in Schmoedown history. At the 2018 Collider Collision, Dan Murrell, 7-2, 4 KOs, former 2-time champion of the movie trivia Schmoedown, faced Andrew Guy, the supposed weak link of Team Action, in his debut singles match. Guy leads 7-6 after round 1, which was shocking enough. Murrell spins opponent's choice, Murrell starts answering questions incorrectly, Guy is stealing answers, Guy has a good round 2, things end up finishing in Andrew Guy's favor, and Murrell's return to the game is tainted. But Dan isn't finished yet. As we've seen from every single match he's played in besides these last 2 blunders, Dan Murrell is an incredible competitor in the movie trivia Schmoedown. We already know what happened the first time Murrell lost to somebody that likes to talk trash. He bounces back in a really big way. With the Anarchy-style teams for the 2018 tournament announced, and Murrell partnered up with Roka playing at the next live event, no matter the outcome, we're in for a show. Will the original GOAT of the Schmoedown get his revenge? We'll find out soon enough.